So, yesterday I finished my reading of Pale Fire by Vladimir Nabokov. My cover has just been completely. It's an old copy, and the cover was just incredibly brittle and kind of just like cracked off. So, this is what I have. I actually think this looks better than the original cover. Unrelated. I mean, I think this is kind of strange. Um, Actually, this cover is kind of ironic given the context of the book. Um, the most notable thing on the cover is not. I mean, you get the title right. You get Vladimir Nabokov, and then you get Mary McCarthy's praise of Pale Fire. Um, Kind of mirrors the events of the book. Anyway, I'm not going to give a synopsis or like a brief general rundown. I guess I kind of will, but I won't come in discussing what is happening in the book because I mean, you can find like tens of thousands of videos and papers online, Wikipedia pages, whatever that do that. That's not the point of me going over this. I kind of just want to discuss um, my first thoughts after having read it, and um, just processing the book a day after having read it because it's very there's a lot of things happening all at once, simultaneously and separately from one another. But anyway, briefly, just want to go over the structure. So you have the foreword, which is written by Kinbolt, and you have the body of the poem Pale Fire, which is written by John Shade. And then you have the commentary, which references lines of the poem elaborated on by Kinbolt in ways that pertain to the poem, and oftentimes, more often than not, ways that have no relevancy to the poem and have a lot of relevancy to the commentator. So, anyway, I went into this book with no uh, preconceptions of how the narrative was being told. So I thought it was honestly, I thought Pale Fire was just the poem, and the foreword was just by whomever, and the commentary was either written by Nabokov about his own poem or about the same, from the same person who wrote the foreword, which is kind of true. But no, I thought that when I was reading the poem initially, it was an autobiographical poem by Nabokov because I don't really know that much about his personal life. I know that he likes to do chess problems and collects butterflies. That's all I knew. So I was reading Pale Fire, the poem, and I thought, how odd, I didn't know, especially when you get to the, I think it's second or third canto, it talks about Shade talks about his daughter. I was really touched by that, and I didn't realize that. And I went to Vladimir Nabokov's Wikipedia page just reading more about him. I was like, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. This guy doesn't have a daughter, he has a son. His son's alive, and obviously I'm missing something. So I went back to read the foreword because generally when I read works like Pale Fire, which a lot of people know, there's a lot of study on this book. Same thing with something like a classic, which I usually just read classics. The foreword tends to divulge a little bit too much information about the plot, so I tend to skip it and go back later. So when I finished the poem, I went back to the foreword, and that's when the context sort of came right at me. That this was a fictional autobiographical poem about a famous American author. And the draft was being salvaged by Kinbolt, his friend, a fellow professor at Wordsworth University, I believe it's called, and literary scholar who was a great admirer of Kinbolt, actually, and his neighbor for a few months. Um, Once you are introduced to Kinbolt, I don't see I was surprised to find that people found him a reliable narrator from the jump, because from the start you have a lot of hints that he's really not the topmost authority on John Shade's life. He's very he's known him for so briefly and describes his connection with him so intensely that there's just simply no way that could be possible, especially when you kind of get more into his relationship with Mrs. Shade, which I suppose we can get into sometime soon, but he seems to be at odds with nearly everyone in John Shade's life, except for John Shade, who seems polite enough. He just seems I was watching somebody's video and I think they described it nicely. And this is relevant to the structure, of course. The content of the poem is so brief and takes up so little of the actual content of the novel, but it's so impactful and touching and beautifully written that, John Shade, although his voice is minimal within Pale Fire, the novel, the poem speaks volumes. It's very touching. It's like he's a quiet but impactful person, and you can see why. There are a few moments in which Kinbote convinces you to fall in love with John Shade. I mean, he's just. I'm just thinking of some moments now. I don't know if I should touch on them, but I mean, Kinbote writes very beautifully. He says he's written novels. I believe he's said that he's, very comfortable with prose, but not with poetry. But the way he describes Kinbote is very poetic. It's very sort of wistful, and you get into his mind. You really get into his mind, and you sort of fall in love with John Shade too, which makes it even worse because you know that Kinbote is just a terribly subconsciously malicious person. He eats people up and chews them out. He's very brutal. I mean, Kinbote is such almost a Byronic character, I guess. No, that's not true. He's very much a romantic idealist. And I think that's why he falls in love with John Shade, because John Shade is a touch like that too. He tends to romanticize things perhaps a bit more than they ought to be. I mean, that's just the nature of the poet. Like Kinbote says, we're all poets when he's discussing who is he talking to? I don't even remember. There's so many like random characters in this that I don't even bother to remember them offhandedly. If I see their name on the page, I'll remember who they are and what they've done, but offhandedly, not really much. It's really about Kinbote and the Shades, and some characters from Zembla. I think I'm saying that wrong, but I'm going to keep saying it incorrectly anyway. Anyway, yes, John Shade is very sweet. He's just a sweet old man living in Appalachian America. His poetry touches on a lot of the classic American poetic motifs, a lot of nature, birds, butterflies. It's very beautiful. It talks about his sentiments towards his wife, towards his deceased daughter, and goes through some health trauma. He has a health scare with his heart. In his family, his father died of a weak heart. His mother passed away from, I believe, pancreatic cancer. Anyway, the fact that his father has a weak heart is rather relevant, I think, throughout. Because growing up, Shade is a rather weak child, so he's a bit reserved and a little bit rather sheltered. I think his daughter is quite like that too, but obviously she doesn't really suffer from a lot of health issues. But she does kill herself, so obviously there's a lot of mental turmoil going on. And there's this strange supernatural element to the Shades' lives where John Shade's aunt, who had raised him, I think she had raised him pretty much his whole life. When she passed away, when his daughter Hazel was about, I can't remember, she was either 16 or like in her 20s going to college. But anyway, she was kind of aging out of her adolescence and coming into adulthood. And once Aunt Maud dies, a lot of supernatural, like rumblings and sounds come within the house. And there's this barn by their house where she's sort of doing like this paranormal investigation with John Shade's, I think she's like his secretary or whatever. And she gets scared like Witless, the secretary. And Hazel just wants to keep going. And she urges her parents at one point, like it's like the middle of the night, and she's been there for like all night. She's like, guys, you have to come see this. And they come there for like they're sitting there for like hours and nothing happens. And she's like so upset. Anyway, actually, I don't even know if that's actually an actual account of what happened. That's sort of what Kimbo dramatized to be what happened. He literally makes it like a screenplay of the events, but maybe it happened. I mean, I imagine having something like that. I don't think it's too off base, honestly. Kimbo is a liar and a little bit delusional, but I think his delusions are not at all ungrounded. I think he just tends to, as the romantic that he is, he stretches out the truth a bit too much, and always in his favor, make him look very favorable. Particularly when it comes to Mrs. Shade, who I think she very much so. I mean, I don't think there's anything dubious about it. She doesn't like him. I mean, I don't think anyone would like him in her position anyway. He's kind of very forceful upon John Shade, and he wants to know what he's writing. He wants to know the content of the poem before it's finished. He's always asking him about it. And she says she doesn't share anything with anybody but me. Which maybe is parasitic. I think there is a parasitic element to that, in that, Jonathan is kind of meek and she's rather strong and protective. Particularly probably because of the events with her daughter and having been married to a famous living poet. Get a lot of people wanting to latch onto that, and that's just a large theme in the novel in general. So she's sort of like his protector. I don't know how much that correlates with Vladimir Nabokov's own wife. I don't want to speculate into how much he's like John Shade or whatever, but I just think it's kind of interesting because I think we all have sort of people in our lives who want to protect us and can be perhaps a bit too protective. I mean, I don't know if we all, but I think we can all sort of relate to or understand that sort of person who can perhaps be a bit too protective, too prickly, in the name of protecting someone or something that they care about. But I think in this case, she's very much so justified, because Kimbota's actually kind of insane, and he does end up getting John Shade killed. Indirectly, of course, but I mean, just by being in his proximity, it's lethal. So let me talk a little bit about Kimbot himself, our protagonist, as it were. And I think the thing about him is that there's so much going on. It's hard where to start with him. The thing, and I don't want to bring this up, it's hard to talk about, but I think it's relevant that he is gay and promiscuous. I don't think this is what's a sort of archetypical slutty gay guy. I don't think it's like that in terms of villainizing that sort of individual, but I think it's relevant to Kinbote in that it adds more nuance to his relationship with John Shade. There are, I think, 2 times in which it's brought up that a character's question if he's interested in John Shade sexually, which is like outwardly not preposterous, but I mean, he's an old like guy. He's just an old, like, John Shade's an old dude, and Kinbote is usually chasing after these young boys or whatever. I hate to say it like that, but it's true. Like, he says it multiple times. But he's not like his type, but that's sort of the interesting part, isn't it? Because he's just like, he has that sort of admirable love towards John Shade, and you think, okay, there are a lot of times where that feeling transcends outward physical attraction. Is that the case here? How much? And he's always talking shit about Miss Shade all the time. Like, that is, and that's where a lot of the humor comes in Pale Fire, is when Kinbote is just digging into John Shade's wife, and it's just like, this is ridiculous, but it's so funny. I think also, like, that's just that trope of the overbearing wife. Overbearing, I think in her case it's valid, and let's just say something like Skylar White from Breaking Bad. Like, a lot of people strongly dislike her, but most people would probably act the way that she acts, and her her actions are not perfect, of course. I mean, she cheats on Walt or whatever, but like, first and foremost, she was betrayed and lied to, and she tried to do what she could to keep her sanity and keep her family together. I mean, whatever. Obviously imperfect, but that's sort of human nature, is to be imperfect. So, but people hate Skylar much more than they hate Walter. And that's both because it's easier to sympathize with Walter because we are in his shoes, and also because there's that general idea that the wife is in the way, and an element keep pulling the husband back. I don't think that's like a general, like, I think that is a relevant, I'm not saying it's a general relationship dynamic, but it is a one that exists and one that is relevant within the contents of Pale Fire, I would say. You know, the bitch wife, as it were. Okay. What was I saying about Kinbote? Oh yeah, he's gay. He's very promiscuous, and he's always talking about these dudes. Anytime a guy comes up, it's always like he's a hunk. Like, all the time, he's always talking about that. And you couldn't assume that any time a male is being mentioned, you get a general description of as much as their physical appearance as he can glean. And if he's gleamed a lot, he will let you know. So, and you sort of think, how far does that interest in John Shade go? And that's that line between the sexual and the overall gratifying nature of something. And then he sort of gets into that when he talks about the killer. I think his name was like, I can't remember the top of my head, like Grandis or whatever. I have it like John, oh, I just saw it. I have it like Gratis. His alias is Jack Gray. So I write down Jack Gray because it's just easier to remember. But he sort of goes into something like that when he talks about Gratis. And he says, does he derive a sexual pleasure from the thought of killing the political nemesis? And he says, probably to the extent that one might derive a sexual pleasure from. He describes it a certain way, but I picked it up incorrectly as like if you pop a pimple. But he describes it in a very particular way, as Vladimir Nabokov often does. Describes things very particularly, and sometimes in a way that, I personally failed to grasp at points, but You get the general message. It's not like for the sexual pleasure, but it's something, it scratches an itch in your brain, a satisfaction that is only sexual in the way that any sort of satisfaction might be considered sexual. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's not entirely separate from one another, but not strictly either one of the or the other. So I think that's the interesting thing about Kinbot is that you don't really know his motive. And the thing is, he doesn't either, honestly, because he lives in such a insular, how do you say it? No, insular is correct. World where he's the main character. He's the king, right? He's the exiled king. What a romantic story, and he just really plays that up. Oh my god, there's a scene where at the very end he comes up to John Shade and he's like, John Shade is sitting on his porch, like he just looks exhausted. And Kimbo comes in, he's like, "Hey, buddy." He's just so happy because Mrs. Shade is not around, so he's quick to come in. He's like, "Hey, man, you want to come over? I have some wine, and I can tell you." Oh my god! Now this is right when he dies. It's so fucked up. He's like, "Hey, I got this bottle of wine, and we can have a conversation about the themes of your poem." And John Shade, like, I gotta imagine he's so confused by that. He's like, "What do you mean the themes of my poem? Like, the themes of my poem is me. Like, I think that's quite clear." And honestly, as you read through the book, you realize, like, John Shade is not hiding the themes of his poem. It's not really a mystery. You can kind of get it from the jump. I mean, I think Mrs. Shade kind of even says it at one point, but it's not difficult to imagine that this is a poem about his life. So, if that's the case, how can you think that someone writing a poem of their life, how can you think that it would, maybe perhaps some whispers of you are involved, being close to him? But the whole thing being about Zembla, I mean, it's just absurd. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd. Anyway, Kimbo is still convinced of this, and he kind of tries to lure him over with a drink. And I think John Shade... Well, talking about John Shade and Kimbo's relationship is kind of difficult. You don't really know. And that's sort of the point, right? You don't know how close they really are. I think that the friendship is mutual. I think that he likes him, but I think he can just be too much. I think he enjoys him as a friend, but not a close friend, as someone who he can chat with on occasion, and he has some interesting things to say, because Kinbo is a really good storyteller. He can tell a damn good story. But imagine having someone like that in your life to that extent that he's in John Shade's life. I mean, I don't think anybody would want that. So overbearing, so overbearing. But it's just striking that he has this delusion that everything is Zembla. When he holds the poem, oh my god, when he's walking, after having invited John Shade to his house, and he's walking with the envelope of index cards which contains the poem, and he holds it to his chest, and he says, what does he say? It's like, Zembla, I have Zembla pressed to my heart. Like, oh my god. I think that was just, like, that's the thing, like, you feel it, the romanticism so intently, like, you really do feel it, and you kind of sympathize. Because he was resurrecting my Zembla. Oh my god, like, if only that were true. It's not true at all, I'm sorry to say. God, but he just writes so well. I mean, it's so long-winded and just absolutely... Here it is. I was holding all Zembla pressed to my heart. He was holding John Shade's memoir, basically, because the man dies right after. But anyway, that's all Zembla, I suppose. But I mean, Kimbo just writes these long litanies of, honestly, like bullshit half the time. It's so like, I remember I first started reading the commentary, like, this is terrible, this is awful. And then I think about like halfway through, I was so in love with it. God, it's just like, how do I describe reading Pale Fire like in a way like shotgunning a can of Red Bull. Or at least this is my experience because I read the poem forward commentary. So you read the poem and you just like, you're like, oh my god, like you just straight down it straight away because it's so good, it's so well written, and such like has all those tropes of Appalachian like northeastern American poetry. Like it's so easy to just digest and devour, like, and it's fun. It's not fun, but like it's fun now that you know that it's fictional. Like if this was a real poem, it'd be devastating because it's especially with the daughter. And I'm not laughing at that because it's funny. I'm just laughing at that because, I mean, famously Kimbo is like so dismissive of that stuff. Like he's like, oh yeah, he's talking about his daughter, but I don't know when he's gonna get the Zembla. I mean, we can get over the daughter stuff, right? Like, can we move on? So funny, that guy, Jesus. But then you get to that point and you're like, oh my god, like I have the energy now. Like that was just exhilarating. And then you read the forward, you're like, okay, let's. I'm feeling a little bit queasy. I'm feeling some initial effects of the shotgunning, but I still got the energy up. And then you get to the commentary. I think about like 50 pages in the commentary. Like, oh my god, like I don't feel so good. I don't feel so good at all. I don't know about this. And then like you keep reading and you get this sort of steady rhythm. You're like, okay. I'm leveling out. I'm getting it. And it clicks. I don't think the immediate actor. I mean, I don't think the after effect of shotgunning Red Bull will always be that. It clicks, but maybe it's like a sort of. You kind of get that mental clarity when doing drugs. I would think. I don't know. I really don't know on that topic, but at least the beginning, I think it describes it kind of well. And when you go through these adventures in Zembla and how his exile came to be, how he came to be become in America, you sort of learn. Well, you don't sort of. You learn so much about Kinboat that there can be no confusion that this man is absolutely a nut job. He is. I think especially when to keep in mind about Kinboat is the way he just his relationship with people. He is often at odds with a lot of people in his proximity who he gets to know sort of well. For example, he has this wife that he had to marry to produce an heir, although he is not attracted to women at all. Well, of course, he has an outward like appreciation for feminine beauty, and you can see that by the way he describes the women in his proximity of the court. There's this woman in waiting who he's quite fond of, and describes her very well. I mean, very favorably. His wife, he also says she's very beautiful. She has this like. She mentions in Pale Fire, he likens his wife to dark Vanessa. Dark hair, sort of light face, not strong features, but when you have that sort of juxtaposition with the black hair, the pale face, you have this charming contrast. And Kinboat says that is very much how he saw his own wife in Zembla, the queen, and he describes her physically very favorably. However, there's of course the tension that he's not actually in love with her and only has married her because he must have. And they don't really have that. Well, she seems desperate to have that sort of connection of a wife and a husband, but he's obviously very dismissive. Well, not obviously, if you haven't already, you wouldn't know, perhaps, but in general, he's tends to be very dismissive of people who don't serve him immediately. Like, I don't think he has such a connection with anyone that he does with John Shade, or that he claims to have with John Shade, which is why perhaps he's so fixated on John Shade, because he really does believe that they have this unique connection, or that John Shade is someone who he can uniquely appreciate when comparing his relationship to other people who may seem more shallow or lacking that sort of luster that John Shade has as a poet. And he's very dismissive of his wife and in general. A great many people, save for a few, there are a few people from Zembla, this older male gentleman who helped him who helped him escape from the country. He's quite fond of him. I think it's hard to say he respects him, because I think in some ways he does, but not in the way that you might respect someone like a mentor. I think because he was the king, he sees himself as in this ultimate position of respect, so you can't really, in his shoes, respect someone in the same way that he expects to be respected. There will always be a sort of power dynamic obstacle in that path. But with his wife, I struggle to talk about him and his wife, because I think you really have to read it to understand, because he really does, in his strange little way, he sympathizes with her, and actually rather deeply he sympathizes with her in a way that I don't believe he shows sympathy towards most anyone else. I mean, he really sympathizes her in an incredibly deep way, and as far as I can tell, only her. Even John Shade, he's very callous towards. But with his wife, he understands, she's a beautiful young woman. She wants children. She wants to fulfill her duties. And she's just trying. And, he sees that she's trying, but then he realizes, I know that you're trying, but I can't give that to you, even though it's expected for the both of us. So maybe in that way he understands, because he sees himself in her position. He can't... It's difficult for him to produce an heir, so it's difficult for her to be his queen. And he can see that, because it's a conflict he has as well. So perhaps it's some more sympathy, projected sympathy towards his own position, or he does actually feel bad for her, or something in between, because he really seems to have a fondness for her, even though she has these bouts of poor temperament. He does like that, because he can kind of just wish her, there's a word I'm thinking of, but I can't say it. He wants her to whisk her away. I think that's the correct word. He wants to whisk her away so he can have his own. He can fill his time with his own debaucheries. He's a really who's that guy, the Roman king? Sorry, whatever. It starts with a C. It's gonna kill me. Hold on, I have to look it up. Emperor, sorry. What is wrong with my brain right now? It's not Caligula. Caligula. He's a real Caligula. Because I remember Caligula would have those orgy parties on the boats. Yeah, he's very much that sort of type. As far as the king is concerned, he doesn't seem at all interested in stately affairs. He admires his country very much. I don't know if it's because it's his country or he genuinely does admire some features. Well, of course, he generally does. That's the thing with Kimbo. It's always both. It's always both. He loves Zembla. He thinks it's gorgeous. He describes the mountains of Zembla. Of course, he describes Zembla as a woman. I'm guessing the language of Zembla is such that there are masculine and feminine, perhaps neuter genders, like in a lot of in some Indo-European languages. I imagine it's that case, like in Russia, where the country's name is feminine, so you refer to it as her. I wonder if that's the case. If it follows the same rules as French and Russian, where the end vowel indicates that it's feminine. I don't know why I'm talking about this, but I don't know. I thought it was interesting because we don't know if Zembla is real in the setting of Pale Fire or if it's a fake. It's a fabricated reference to another country that is real, but the name has been changed for the sake of Kinbo's publishing. That's the thing that's interesting, you don't really know. I assume that it is a fake country in Europe in the setting of Pale Fire. Not that it's a fake name meant to masquerade for another country. But anyway, not that that's really relevant. But yeah, I think Kinbo is a master of, a character study in someone who is deluded by romanticism and with genuine, earnest feelings towards things. Like, he doesn't fabricate, and I think this is the thing about him that makes him interesting, is that that's really, that's just real human. How do I say this? You often have caricatures in fiction of people like this, who either pretend to be this mighty person with large, sincere feelings for the sake of manipulating others. Kinbo doesn't manipulate people. He doesn't intentionally manipulate people. He is... Perhaps this is because he was the king, and he didn't need to manipulate people to get what he wanted. And oftentimes he didn't have grand ambitions anyway, so he wouldn't need to, do anything on the sly. He would just do what he wanted. And what he wanted to was to bang a bunch of dudes. I don't know, that's really his largest motivation that I can tell. I mean, he loves literature. He likes to bang guys. That's honestly what motivates him. A lot of his actions. Anyway, and that's the thing I think is relevant when you bring up his sexuality. How far does that go in his interest in John Shade? I think that's relevant. And not because of the fact that he's gay. I think that's, John Shade could be a woman and he could be straight. Who knows? Who cares? It doesn't matter. Kind of, but not really. But Vladimir Nabokov is able to capture that nuance of people who, so-and-so is a narcissist, they're manipulative, watch out for when they do this, that, and the third thing. But it's these people, it's not deliberate. It's just a nature to them. It's just the way the world is in their mind. And that's when you read Kinbo, you're this is just... He's not deceptively trying to take John Shade's poem and publish the commentary to show himself in a favorable light. Of course, there's a little part of that, but that's not his main motivator at all. And I wouldn't even say that's a very conscious driver of his. He's kind of critical to himself at times, but that's not the point, right? The point is he wants to tell his story. He wants to leave behind a greater legacy than what he has now. And John Shade was his window, was his opportunity. And when he opened Pale Fire and he didn't see any Zembla, he saw scarce references to himself. There's one overt reference to a king, but it's so divorced from his story that it hardly doesn't matter. It doesn't even matter what the hell he's talking about with this king thing. And you get that picture when he dissects the poem, because he doesn't actually talk about the story of the poem at all. He talks about his story, and he's trying to salvage his story within it. I mean, I'm not saying anything new, but I just think that is the mastery of Pale Fire. And the thematic and confusing and long-winded nature of it is sort of the point. There is a literary critic who described Pale Fire as pedantic. In fact, he described, let me bring this up again, Mary McCarthy, whose quote is here. She gave a very, very generous praising review of Pale Fire. And this critic, he called both Mary McCarthy and Pale Fire pedantic, just as pedantic as Kinbo. So I think this cover is a bit of a nod to that. Ironically, sort of, what's the way to say it? Saying the joke before it's been said so you can get ahead of it. I don't know if Pale Fire is pedantic. I think it says a lot of valid things that ought to be said about commentary on literary pieces. Of course, it's so overblown and ridiculous that you can't really say that that's its main goal, but I think you can take that away from it when you read someone's academic commentary on something. You don't have to take it for what it is. You can make your own assessments and realize that a piece of fiction written by someone you don't know, years ago in a place you could have never imagined to live in, it's not going to mean the same thing to you as it meant to them. And you'll have to take away from it what you can. And what Kinbo takes away from it is something so absurdly wrong. But at the same time, it's like, is his analysis any more valid having known the man, having lived next to him, having studied beside him? Is it any more valid than, say, someone else who could have studied his life and breathe more context into the contents of Pale Fire? I don't know. And does it matter? I don't know, who knows? But anyway, I really fell in love with this book after trudging along through it. I think this is a great way to start the year. I'm actually very bummed I don't have any more Nabokov in my queue. But whatever. I mean, I just have to keep reading different books and forgetting about Pale Fire, unfortunately. But anyway, that's my initial thoughts on Pale Fire. I'm probably going to go back and go into more detail about it, because there's so many little things that illuminate on what's going on, and a lot of literary references that are not there to seem pedantic, but to put you in that space of the literary critic. And some of them I'm familiar with, most of them I'm not. I do want to read Pope. There's this, what's the very famous work by Alexander Pope? It's like the rape of the, I don't know. I don't know if I can even say that. It's the name of the Rape of the Lock. That's the name of it. I don't know. I don't condone that action. I don't know. That's just the name of the book. But anyway, someone recommended that to me, and I really want to get to read that. And I think maybe reading that will help me understand John Shade a little bit more, because he is such a whisperer in this book. But I think there might be something worth understanding his studies, what he does, and what's going on in his mind. And maybe understand what's going on in his daughter's mind, in Aunt Maud's mind, whatever. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts on Pale Fire. I very much recommend it. It's sometimes hard to read, but for good reason. It's worth it. You get the payout of it. I think that's generally the same with Nabokov in general. Very difficult to read, very confusing at times, sometimes very easy to read, sometimes very fun to read, oftentimes very fun to read, and I think you will have a much more appreciation coming out of it than when you're in it. But yeah, very great book.